Hello there, I'm errant. This is Boom Bust, and these are the stories that we're tracking for you today. First up, you thought your DVR was pretty cool, right? Well, wait until you hear about the latest technology Netflix is working on. Some pretty incredible stuff. You won't want to miss it. Then we have American economist, theorist, author, and champion of modern monetary theory, Warren Mosler, on today's show. His unorthodox and attention-grabbing economic beliefs never fail to excite, and you won't want to miss our interview with him. And finally, in today's big deal, Edward Harrison and I discuss EB-5 visas. It's a federal immigration platform better known as investments for green cards. Yeah, that's what it's better known as, that program. You won't want to miss a moment, and it all starts right now. Last week, when Comcast said they were acquiring Time Warner Cable for a cool $45 billion, it was all anyone in the world of technology, media, and business could talk about. And while the deal, if completed, will no doubt reshape pay TV as we know it today, what many overlooked last week was a pretty incredible announcement by Netflix. Now, the online TV and movie outfit is currently in the process of building an artificial brain using Amazon cloud technology. Yeah, talk about revolutionizing an industry. Now, Netflix is moving into a field of research known as deep learning. That means that Netflix is training its software to provide better recommendations by feeding massive amounts of information to a technology called neural networks. Now, neural networks mimic how the human brain identifies patterns. So, opposed to making suggestions based on things you've already seen, Netflix instead will make suggestions based on what you actually like about your favorite shows and movies. And to create this deep learning software, Netflix is taking advantage of Amazon's powerful cloud infrastructure, and that is some powerful infrastructure right there. Now, Netflix isn't the only player in the tech world to utilize deep learning, and in an effort to increase their bottom line, Facebook, IBM, and Google have all recently hired experts in the field of neural networks. In fact, IBM has said its supercomputer Watson will soon be able to reason and debate. Yeah, true story. You thought the overpriced merger of two of the largest cable companies in the U.S. was impressive? How about having your DVR tell you what you think before you even know it yourself? Now that is really impressive. Now, in January, economic figures came out showing that the U.S. grew at an annualized rate of 3.2%. Everyone was telling us that the U.S. was poised for even faster growth at that time. However, not investor and economic analyst Warren Mosler. He used his understanding of how different sectors of the economy interact to analyze the figures. Mosler's caution has been validated this week in recent economic data, so I was keen to get his view on where the U.S. is headed next, especially in terms of the labor market. Now, Warren, last time we spoke, you indicated that you saw weakness in the U.S. economy that many analysts did not. Since then, we've seen 2 consecutive weak jobs numbers. Now, is the labor market one of your concerns?
Yes, one of many. Everything seems to be going down. If you see anything that's going up, please let me know here.
I know, right? Well, that leads to my next question. What about retail sales? We've seen a lot of inventory building at U.S. companies. Is this a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, it's a bad thing for the economy and for growth. And if you look at the total retail sales for the last 3 months, the growth rate has been slipping every month. And this month, coming out, Thursday, it's supposed to be minus 0.1, so it's going into negative territory.
Now, in the U.S. auto sector, U.S. manufacturers, they currently all have over 100 days sales on their lots, and other sellers have an average of 3 months inventory. Isn't this a lot of inventory in anticipation of demand?
Yes, it is. And it's interesting, of course, because the same amount of inventory, same number of cars becomes more months as the rate of sales slows, right?
Right.
So the November number didn't look so bad. All of a sudden, the sales slow for 2 months. Now it looks awful.
Do you think we're going to see a big problem with this?
We already are. We're seeing cutbacks in production, and everything's going backwards. I see us just slipping. Growth is slipping away very quickly.
Indeed. Now, what about the housing? 2013 was a record year on the residential property front. Where do you see this trend heading?
Well, mortgage applications for purchasing homes are now down 17% year over year. So that has to tell you something, right? Pending sales have looked like they've collapsed, and housing starts and all the others have rolled over. So, and even there's like inventories are now going up. They're higher year over year than they were last year for the first time. Still low, but higher year over year.
Now, what are your thoughts on GDP for this first quarter?
Well, it keeps getting revised down. It started somewhere around 3%, and the latest number I just saw from a dealer was 1.7. So if it keeps getting revised down at this rate, we're not going to have much left by March 31st. So it's not good, not good.
Not good.
No, it could slip to negative.
In your opinion, other than what we've gone over, what's driving it down?
Lack of sales, right? Because GDP is basically sales. And we had inventory building, which we're not doing anymore. Now we turn to inventory liquidation, which means even less production and output, less sales. And income. The incomes aren't there. If you look at personal income growth year over year, it's been slipping, and it's somewhere near zero, depending on how you look at it. You can look at it, and the deeper you get into it, the worse it looks. So personal income growth is slipping, but then you look at it in real terms after inflation, it looks much worse. Then you look at it per capita, and we're towards the zero level. So if you're not getting growth in money to spend, how can you get growth in things people buy? It just doesn't make any sense. And of course, why is income growth falling, right?
Well, the question is, what about consumer credit? Why is that increasing?
Yeah. It's why did it increase?
Yes.
Well, on a year-over-year basis, it actually did. It's staying very, very flat, and it wasn't material in any case. And you did have some increase in the last half of last year as food and energy prices unexpectedly went up, and people had to dip into credit cards a little bit to live. And that unwinds also as we go forward. Now, of course, the underlying reason for all this is what's called unspent income. Are you familiar with that concept?
Please explain.
Yeah, so if anybody doesn't spend all of his income, then the output that he produced can't get sold unless someone else spends more than their income. Okay, that's just a simple accounting identity. GDP is everything bought plus, which equals everything sold. It's all the same thing, just looking at it from one side of the coin to the other. So for every agent who doesn't spend all of his income, someone else must have spent more than his income, or you wouldn't have had that much GDP. So why don't people spend all of their income? Well, you've got big tax advantages to go into IRAs and pension funds. You've got corporations, that build up, $2 trillion in unspent income. You have foreign central banks building up unspent income by selling things in the United States and not spending the income. That's the trade deficit, $500 billion, roughly, $450 billion. And so you have all this unspent income piling up, which requires someone else to spend more than their income, or the output doesn't get sold. And so who is the biggest spender who spends more than his income? Well, that's the federal government. And what did we see last year? We saw the federal government cut back on deficit spending. Deficit spending is spending more than income. Okay, and it's like the deficit spending is like an allowance to the economy from Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam's his little, boy and his little girl, and he gives them an allowance. He spends more than his income, and they've been getting their allowance cut, and it's down to 3% of GDP, and it doesn't look like that's any longer enough to offset the demand leakages, given the lack of anyone else being in a position to spend more than his income. So does that make any sense?
It does. It was actually very well put. But I want to revisit what you said before about wage growth. Why is wage growth so flat at the moment?
So when you have low demand and you have high levels of unemployment, then that's symptomatic, right? So people have to compete for the available jobs. People have to work to eat. Businesses only hire if they can get it on their terms. And so you've got continuous competition for the available jobs, and there are always plenty of job offerings out there because business will hire those people at a lower rate than people who are already working, and then those people will be let go or one way or another be out of the business. And so it's a continuous replacement process of low-income people replacing, low-wage earners replacing higher-wage earners. And anecdotally, of course, there are thousands of anecdotes that have been floating around for years, and it's true.
Now, in reading some of your recent commentary, I see that you point to interest income as a key to sustaining demand. Now, would you explain how this fits into your view of the effects of interest rates on the economy?
Yeah, one of the reasons the deficit has been coming down, or isn't as high as it would be, is because interest rates have come down, and the federal government is a net payer of interest. And so people's income, a lot of it, the personal income, is interest income. And the government is the largest payer of interest, and of course there's savings accounts and that type of thing. And so with the economy a net receiver of interest on the 17 trillion of government debt, so to speak, as interest rates come down, the economy is receiving less interest. And now lower interest rates are supposed to help the economy because they help borrowers. They help you borrow, but at the same time, they take away your income. So think of the economy going into the bank for a loan, right? Mm-hmm. The banker says, well, interest rates are down, that's good, but gee, I see your income's down. Okay, which one's more important? Well, the data is telling us the drop in income is far more important than the drop in interest rates when it comes to lending. And so the whole thing's in this stagnation. You might call it almost a downward spiral now, because we can see all kinds of inflation numbers and indicators decelerating, disinflation type of thing.
Time now for a quick break, but stick around, because when we return, more from my interview with economist Warren Mosler. Then in today's Big Deal, Edward Harrison and I talk about immigration fraud, more specifically the EB-5 visa program, which allows foreigners to live in the U.S. only if they invest considerable amounts of money in, quote, job-creating ventures. You will definitely want to hear about this one. And it's all coming up, so stay tuned.
Patients are force-fed.
Two explosions near the finish line of the Boston Marathon.
More than 1,000 people have gathered.
What is the latest that you're hearing about the number of victims?
Continuing our conversation with investor Warren Mosler now, we're going to segue into a discussion about the government's role within the broader economy and dive into the philosophical issues, or the government's role in terms of taxes and coercion. Is it we want you, or you owe me? Let's find out. Now, the Fed says that low rates are helping the economy because the debtors, they have lower interest rates. You disagree, no?
Yeah, I was going to say that proves it, right?
Yeah.
So
there you go. End of question. Moving right along.
Yeah. They also said the swap lines to the ECB were fully secured. So okay.
There you go.
So it's an honest opinion. Okay, it's not dishonest for them to be saying that. It all depends on what are called the propensities to consume out of income. So in other words, who gets helped more, the borrower or the saver? If you're a borrower and it's $100 a month cheaper, are you more inclined to spend? Or if you're a saver and you get an extra $100 of interest income, are you more inclined to spend? It's hard to say, right? You have to look at the data. So, and Then, of course, the savers outnumber the borrowers by 17 trillion because the government's a net payer of interest on 17 trillion of net obligations to the economy, net debt to the economy. And so the propensities for the borrower to have to way exceed the saver just to break even because of that 17 trillion imbalance. The economy is a big net saver of 17 trillion. And so the Fed is saying that they think that the borrowers are helped more than the savers even though there's 17 trillion more in savings than there is in debt for the economy. And it's not that they're wrong, because that's possible. It's not that they're wrong that can't be the case, but you have to look at the data and see what's going on. So if you look at Japan with zero interest rates for 20 years and up until the latest, let's call them shenanigans, the strongest currency in the world and the lowest inflation, and then I look at the U.S. for 5 years and now Europe with zero rates, and I'm going, well, maybe these propensities, these interest rates aren't all that they're cracked up to be. Maybe the savers get hurt more than the borrowers just because they have 17 trillion more in savings than the borrowers have borrowed. Maybe they get hurt more. Well, it just seems obvious to me.
Are you saying that the U.S. is the next Japan?
I think it's already been happening in everything except the stock market. But in terms of the real economy, yeah, that's what's been going on.
And I mean, they've done this for 20, 30 years now almost. It can go on for a while. At what point does it end?
Well, it ends when you realize that, deficit reduction is backwards and you're not supposed to be doing that, and that you're supposed to be making the deficits larger, not smaller. You're either supposed to be cutting taxes or increasing spending depending on your politics. Okay, so if you're the big government type with more public infrastructure and everything else, you'd want more spending. If you the private sector type, you'd want lower taxes, and then you get a grand bargain somewhere in between, and we have the best economy we've ever seen. But until they realize that the actual problem is the deficit's too small, it needs to be larger, they're going to continue to go backwards. And even this year, we're still engaging in relatively modest, but it's still deficit reduction. They're still making it worse instead of better.
But isn't Japan increasing deficits?
They are this year, and it seems to be working. Of course, what happens in April, right? The consumption tax goes up. Why? Because they're trying to bring down the deficit. And every time in the past they did that, they set themselves back. And every time they let the deficit go up, they started to do better. But then people get scared of the deficit. They think it's some kind of problem. We're leaving the debt to our children. They go through all this nonsense over what's just a bunch of outstanding tax credits, right? The U.S. dollar is just the thing that gets used to pay taxes. When the government spends $1, either gets used to pay taxes or it just remains in the economy as an outstanding tax credit. And it'll remain as cash, securities, which are just balances at the Fed, or reserves, which are just balances at the Fed. But it's all the 17 trillion deficit is just the outstanding tax credits that have been spent, and nobody's used them to pay taxes yet. It's like there's nothing that they can possibly cause to go wrong. Yet it's the biggest fear out there. It's driving policy, and it's destroying our civilization, to be quite frank.
Now, I want to ask you, should full employment be the overriding goal of public policy, or are there other equally important considerations like inflation?
Okay, so you have to look at it the other way around. So what is the point of government? Okay, so government is there for public infrastructure for public purpose, such as the military. If you don't defend yourself, you lose the war. Legal system for contracts and contract law, or you don't have any private property or private anything if you don't have some kind of institutional structure behind it. Okay, so we need this public infrastructure. Now, without government, there is never any unemployment. If you go to any non-monetary society, there is no unemployment. Unemployment is a monetary phenomenon. Unemployment is people looking for paid work, not people looking to do volunteer work. So if there isn't any money, you don't have what we call unemployment. And if you go to the American Indians before we landed, there was no unemployment the way we know it, people looking around waiting for paid jobs. Okay, and so that's a creation of the monetary system. And the way it works is it's a creation of taxation. The government levies a tax which is payable only in its own currency, and that causes people to need that money to pay the tax or face the penalties. And so they are suddenly unemployed. They're looking for paid work to earn the money to pay the tax, and they also like to save a little bit. So they're looking to earn money to pay the tax and probably to save. Okay, so the government creates unemployment when it puts a tax on us. Then it spends its otherwise worthless dollars to hire the people it just caused to be unemployed to provision a government in the military, in the legal system, and in public health and education, whatever else it wants to do. Okay, so the only reason you have unemployment is because the tax unemployed more people than the government wanted to provision itself with, than it wanted to hire. Like, what sense does that make? Okay. If the government didn't want all those people, it shouldn't have had the tax so high to begin with. Or if it does want those people, go hire them. You know, and so the unemployment is a consequence of bad public policy, mistaken public policy. But it is deliberate policy. And in that sense, it's not wrong to call it a crime against humanity, because they are levying a tax that creates the unemployment and then only hiring part of the unemployed they created and leaving the others to die on the vine. And it's, you know, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say it's all done in total innocence, and we can move on to the next question.
Well, actually, I'm glad that you brought up the American Indians, because I was going to ask you to please give me an example of a non-monetary society. Oh, so thank you for doing that.
The other one is Ghana. Before the British went in, and they went in, and people lived in their huts and did whatever they were doing for subsistence living, and farming and hunting and that type of thing, and teaching their kids school, and everybody was helping out. There was no unemployment. Then the British came in and wanted to grow coffee, and they started offering people. Yeah, they started offering people ways to money or whatever. Well, nobody wanted it. Nobody cared. So what did? They put a hut tax on everyone. They said, you have to pay so many pounds or crown or whatever it is per month, or we're going to burn down your hut. Okay, now they've created unemployment. People need those coins to be able to pay the tax to not get their house burned down. And so they would show up at the coffee plantations to earn the crown or the coins to be able to save their houses. And that it immediately monetized Ghana. And the British would always hire anybody who needed work paying the coins, because they knew they were creating this unemployment, these people who were coming down to work. And if they got more people than they needed, they just lowered the tax. Okay, they didn't tax 10,000 coins and then only let them earn 9,000 and go burn down their huts. I mean, what sense would that make? But that's exactly what we're doing today.
It sounds like similar intimidation tactics used by the mafia, if you will. If you don't pay us, we're going to burn down your business.
Yeah, it's absolutely coercive. You pay your tax or you lose your house, your car. I mean, you know, you just say the word IRS, it sends chills down everybody's spine, right?
Right, but they do provide us with roads and garbage pickup and the rest of it.
Sure, but it's coercion. It's not voluntary. They don't ask for volunteers to build the roads and to take care of the sewer system and teach the schools, right? It's all coercion through the taxation.
That was economist and investor Warren Mosler. Time now for today's big deal. Big deal. Edward Harrison joins me to discuss visas, and I'm not talking about the plastic kind. No, not those. Now, a new trend in alternative financing for small businesses and startup companies is the EB-5 Visa Direct Investment Program. Now, it connects wealthy overseas investors who want a green card with regional business owners who need money to grow and expand. And now a mounting number of business owners are skipping traditional bank loans and venture capitalists for this faster and cheaper financing alternative. Ed, good thing or bad thing for the U.S. economy?
Well, it's an interesting question, because basically, just to give you a broad history.
This is your purview.
Yeah, I used to be a diplomat, and all junior diplomats in the U.S., when they start out, they actually start out doing visas, the non-immigrant visa section. And so we learn about visa law, et cetera, and so forth. And in 1965, the visa law was changed to reflect family reunification as an emphasis for the United States. Okay. And that meant that 74% of visas in America were to be handed out under that particular purview. So family reunification as the emphasis for visa law. And that's been what's been the paradigm now for 50 years. And what we've seen is a lot of other countries have a different paradigm, and they've increased, especially Canada, Switzerland, Britain. They have what's called a Tier 1 visa system, and these are all these investor visas. So the United States, in a sense, is actually trying to compete with these other countries in terms of getting, wealthy or job-creating type people to come to the United States instead of the previous emphasis, which was family reunification.
There you go. Interesting. And now here's some other facts. Congress created the EB-5 visa program in the 1990s, when you were working on it, to stimulate economic growth through capital investment by foreign investors, like we said. But the program has boomed over the past 7 years as traditional forms of financing have dried up. Now, what does the growing number of EB-5 visa applicants tell us about the state of the U.S. banking system today, or lending system today?
Yeah, I think it says more about the fact that we are competing better in a sense for these types of visas than it says anything about the actual financial system.
Right.
Because, the cap is 10,000 on this visa program, but when it first started out, there were less than 1,000 people per year that came to the United States under the system.
Right.
But over time, it's ramped up, and now we're getting 6,000, 7,000 people a year under the system. And in that sense, instead of a Chinese individual who has lots of money and who wants to start a job or start a company, he might have gone to Vancouver 3 years ago, but now he could potentially consider going, or she, to the United States under this program.
Right, and we're under the assumption that they want to start a company opposed to just obtain a green.
That's the assumption,
it's a win-win, if you will. Now, to obtain the visa, individuals, they must invest $500,000 to $1 million and create at least 10 American jobs, new American jobs, that is, over a period of 2 years. However, the program has recently been plagued by allegations of fraud and charges of mismanagement by immigration officials, charges that have led to increased scrutiny of the program, which has caused delays in the application process. Now, here's the question. Who, in your opinion, is more hurt by these delays? The foreign investor looking to obtain a green card and start a business, or the small business owner looking to have capital?
or the American taxpayer.
Or the American,
Because look, I used to be on the non-immigrant visa side, and so we actually see these visas because for some reason, I think that it was through our system that it came. And I remember I found one visa that was going to the processing center in New Hampshire, and it was for a visa that I knew somehow, I can't remember now the circumstance, it was fraudulent, okay? So I was just like, this is complete fraud. This guy is not getting this job. I can tell. I'm going to call New Hampshire and tell them what the story is and make sure that this guy doesn't get into the country. But the rigmarole to deal with the whole system, all of the back channel, it just didn't work, and eventually he did actually get his visa.
That's incredible. Ed, as always, thank you for your insight. That's all for now, but you can see all segments featured in today's show on YouTube at youtube.com/boombustrT. We love hearing from you, so check out our Facebook page at facebook.com/boombustrT. You can also tweet at us at errant, at EdwardNH. From all of us here at Boom Bust, thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.